I'd like to call the May 19th, 2022 Board of Zoning Appeals meeting to order. I'd request the staff confirmation that the Kansas Open Meeting Act required notice has been properly provided.
I can confirm that the packet was posted and provided.
Next, we'll move on to roll call.
I will call the board's roll. Board Member Miles.
Here.
Board Member Owens.
Here.
Chair Dorsweiler.
Here.
With Mr. Sharp no longer eligible to serve on the board due to moving outside the city limits, we currently have 4 members and 3 constitutes a quorum, so we have a quorum to proceed with today's business.
Next, we'll move on to approval of the April 21st, 2022 regular meeting minutes. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes? If not, is there a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the April 21st, 2022 regular meeting minutes. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Oppose, nay. Motion carries. Next, we'll move on to new business, application V22-4, filed by Omaha Truck Center Incorporated.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a application that's been filed. It's requesting a variance from section 42-552E2 of the city's off-street parking regulations, which requires all off-street parking spaces, access drives, and aisles located in a C5 zoning district to be paved with asphalt or concrete. The applicant is requesting that the parking spaces and driving aisles on their property be allowed to have gravel surfacing instead of paving. And the location we are at is primarily Lot 4, or Lot 1 and a portion of Lot 4 in the White Truck addition to the City of Salina, which is addressed as 2552 North 9th Street, and also by reference is at the southeast corner of North 9th Street and Pleasant Hill Road. So we provided you 2 pieces of background information about this application. One is background information on the property, and this was a site that was first developed back in 1974 with a 25,600 square foot office and shop building for Salina Truck Sales. Was constructed and opened in 1974. This property has direct access to North 9th Street. There's no driveway connection to the street to the north, which used to be Culver Road and is now Pleasant Hill Road. That has dedicated right-of-way for a street, but has never been improved to city street standards, and it's in a gravel and dirt condition, so there was no driveway connection allowed to that street, as the city didn't want the trucks traversing the unimproved dirt and gravel road. The other thing that we wanted to provide you in the way of background for was just the history of the paving requirement, how it came to be amended and modified, and how it has been applied. But if you look at page 4 of your report, the initial ordinance that required paving of parking and driving aisles was enacted in 1990, and it included some changes from previous ordinances, and that what that means is that in 1990 the change exempted or grandfathered in existing unpaved parking areas from the paving requirement. So if you are familiar with the insurance office at the corner of Ohio and Ash, which used to be Knowles Country Real Estate, the little red barn, if you go by there, you'll see that all their parking is gravel. And the reason it has gravel parking is because it had gravel parking prior to the ordinance being adopted, so their gravel parking was considered to be grandfathered, and they haven't done any expansions or enlargements of the business or the building or the parking area. The other change that was made is exempted any permitted use in a residential district that had 6 or fewer spaces required. Those spaces could be gravel. So if you built a home in Salina and you wanted to have a gravel driveway, your approach would have to be paved, but if you chose, you could have a gravel driveway at your single-family residence because that requires fewer than 6 spaces. It did require that, for instance, the insurance office at Ohio Ash, if you do have gravel parking, the ordinance requires you to use crushed stone or gravel and maintain that area in a presentable condition. We provided some flexibility for shared parking arrangements when you had maybe a church and a business that were sharing the same space and using them at different times. And so all those things were important. The only thing that was a trigger would be if you did a business expansion or you did something with your building or business that required additional parking over and above what you had, then that would require the expanded parking area to be paved, and the grandfather gravel could remain as is. So since we've had that in 1990, we haven't been super effective in eliminating the creation of new gravel lots, but we have not had a lot of success in going back to existing gravel areas and getting them paved. So there's not been a gradual elimination. If you note, in the original ordinance, there was a sunsetting provision in there that said if you had a gravel lot, you had to pave it within 5 years. That was eliminated, and the grandfathering provision took its place. So as we focus on this particular property, staff received an application for a building permit that was proposing to construct an addition on the north side of the existing building at 2552 North 9th. Originally, we didn't get a site survey, and we eventually got a site survey and updated building permit plans. And during the review, staff noted that some of the off-street parking spaces and driving aisles being proposed were shown as gravel on the site plan. These graveled areas were formerly grass and dirt and were not used for any vehicle parking or storage or driving area. So we informed the applicant that the truck center is located in a C5 district. That district requires all driving aisles and paved parking spaces to be paved. So there was a meeting that was held with city staff. Mr. Hers represented the city at that meeting and provided the options that are outlined on page 5, and that would be to remove the existing gravel areas and restore that back to turf grass. In other words, not use it for the parking or storage of vehicles. They could convert the gravel area into a paved parking area. There could be a fence put around the area, and it could be used for fenced-in storage. For instance, we have some car repair businesses which have fenced-in impound yards where they store vehicles that are waiting for parts or for different things, and they're not for cars that are moved every day. Or the fourth option was to submit an application to the Board of Zoning Appeals requesting relief from the paved surfacing requirements. The applicants have indicated that the gravel driving and parking areas on the site survey are critical to their operations, and rather than paving these areas, they have chosen to submit this application requesting relief from the paving requirement. As justification, they state that their dealership's on the edge of the city in a heavy commercial area. The majority of the space used is concrete, and gravel portion has been gravel for years. They've also provided a cost estimate for what it would take to convert all the gravel areas to paving. So we've summarized the requirement. Historically, this has been used as an automotive service facility for semi-trucks. From the aerial photography, it appears that the use on the property has expanded from just a service facility to automotive or semi-truck sales, because there's quite a few more vehicles occupying space on the property than there has been historically. So, as part of our building permit review, staff has still not been able to calculate the number of off-street parking spaces required on this site due to the lack of information about the size of the vehicle sales area, whether there is a vehicle display area, and we don't have information on the number of service bays inside the existing facility. So, if you look at the surrounding area, Dustin, if we could look at a aerial or a zoning map of the surrounding area, you have this truck center to the north. You have vacant agricultural land. To the south, you have a liquor store and Gleason and Son signs. To the east, you have an illegal trailer storage operation that staff is working to get cleaned up. That's being used by Palmer Trucking in violation of the C5 standards. So they have an outstanding violation notice, and we're working to get those trailers all removed. And then to the west, you have vacant commercial property. If you want to scroll a little farther to the south, Dustin, there's a lot at the corner of Monarch and 9th at the northwest corner there that there's currently some filling and grading activity going on there, where a business is trying to create a building pad there for future construction. Almost all of this property is in a 100-year floodplain, and so to do any new construction, any new buildings would have to be elevated above the 100-year flood elevation. So you are sitting as a Board of Zoning Appeals, and you have the power to authorize in specific cases a variance from the specific terms of the zoning regulations, which will not be contrary to the public interest, where due to special conditions, a little or enforcement of the regulations would result in unnecessary hardship for the applicant. So we're a little out of our traditional territory for this board, and it's not altogether clear that this is the appropriate body to review that, but you do have the authority to grant variances to various development standards, such as the number of parking spaces. So the one thing that is clear is that in order to grant a variance, you must find that there's some unique or special condition relating to the characteristics of the property which makes compliance with the paving standard a hardship for the owner. So as we look to uniqueness, the uniqueness needs to relate to the physical condition of the property, and the applicant points out the fact that gravel surfacing has been placed for a number of years. And it is true that the larger expanded gravel area has been in place since at least 2014, but it's also true that staff had previously sent a violation notice to Don Kind, who was the general manager of Kansas Truck Center, in May of 2014, informing them that the gravel surfacing was a zoning violation, and Kansas Truck Center did not respond or rectify the situation. At the same time, staff did not refer the matter to municipal court because we try to achieve voluntary compliance first before referring matters for prosecution. But the fact remains that this property received a violation notice in 2014 about the gravel surfacing that had been placed on the property. The applicant states that the south area of the parking lot backs up to a creek and separates the business from the businesses to the south. We would note that to be grandfathered, you have to have a gravel parking lot that was in place prior to 1990, and that all new parking and driving areas since that time must be paved. And the other thing is dealing with the question about being at the edge of the city. Staff's response is that we have C5 zoning. It applies all across the city. It applies in North Salina. It applies in South Salina. We don't have two different standards based on where you are in the city. So everyone that has C5 zone property is subject to the same development standards, except you have a few that might be zone commercial that had pre-existing gravel lots. So you've been provided a quote to replace the gravel area on the lot with concrete would exceed the cost of $350,000. We're not sure if that means every square inch of the property. What you'll note from the series of aerial photos of the property is that you had an original development there that was paved, and then there's been gradual encroachments to take areas that were grass or dirt and convert them to gravel instead of converting them to paving. And so the hardship has to relate to a physical difficulty or impossibility with compliance. The increased cost alone is not sufficient grounds for granting a variance. If you look at it strictly from a financial standpoint, granting a particular business or property a variance based purely on costs would give an undue financial advantage to that property owner compared to the owners of similarly zoned and situated properties who have complied with the city standards. An example of that would be the truck service facility on the west side of North 9th Street, where all parking and driving areas are paved with concrete. So just to the west of this property, on the south side of Monarch Road, is a brand new Petrolube facility, and it is in a similar business operation, and all of their driving areas where they move vehicles, store vehicles, are paved with concrete. So if you grant a waiver or variance to a particular property based on cost alone, then you could have another property, also zone C5, also a truck service facility, and they have paved all their areas in compliance with the ordinance. So the applicant states that the gravel areas was already or is already a hard surface that's been there for years, not had any adverse effect on health, safety, morals, order, convenience in the many years that it's been gravel. That is a subjective question. Since we did send a violation notice to Kansas Truck Center in 2014, asking them to either cease using the expanded gravel areas or to pave those areas. And as a matter of policy, the Planning Commission and City Commission have made a determination that requiring paved parking in commercial zoned areas is in the best interest of the public, functionally and aesthetically. So then we have to look at the spirit and intent of the ordinance. Again, the applicant points to this far north location. You're actually leaving the city here. It's right on the edge of things. There are some other businesses in this area that have gravel parking and storage. Some of those date back to the 1960s and have been grandfathered. So again, we have C5 zoning. We don't have C5 zoning for North Salina and a separate C5 zoning. For South Salina, we have one zoning district, and it has a uniform set of standards that apply throughout the city. We certainly understand that gravel is less expensive than asphalt or concrete, but that would apply to any location in the city. And there's reasons that the Planning Commission and City Commission require paid parking in commercial districts that are independent of solely of the cost factor. So as a board, you just need to be careful to identify the factors unique to this property that would justify a waiver of the paving requirement. And those findings would be important to distinguish this situation from other cases or requests to avoid having this request become a precedent for other areas. So staff stands ready to assist the board with whatever decision it makes in making those appropriate findings, but we do think it's really important that the board identify those factors that are unique to this property that would justify a waiver in this case. So we've identified for you the alternative of approving the variance to the paving standard as requested by the applicant, with or without any conditions that the findings of fact can be made. You can postpone action on this application to a future meeting date if additional information is required. You could deny the applicant's request if you don't think the findings could be made. The applicants could apply for a change to I-2 zoning, which does not require paid parking. We haven't suggested that and didn't offer that because there's been 3 requests to rezone the property to the east. Those were all denied due to concerns about spot zoning. And in the case of the Palmer Trucking, their request was denied, but they put their trailers out there anyway, and so we're in the process of getting those removed. So, Dustin, I guess if you could walk through the narration of the chronology, and staff wants to point out a couple things that we started out with a entirely paved area when the business first opened, and then there was some gradual additions of gravel around the edges, particularly at the south edge. If you want to go to the next year, Dustin.
So at the top of each slide, you'll see the year in which the aerial photo was taken. 83 would have been the first one that we have after the building was constructed and the operations began at this facility. Then we go to 97, then 2001, and in 2001 you can see it's starting to grow a little bit more to the south. And then in 2005 we get into aerial photography, and you can see the distinction between the paving, gravel, and grass a little bit clearer. In 2007, it's starting to go beyond just the skirting of the concrete paving and all the way down to the fence. And that'll be continued out as we go through the more recent aerial photography. So this is 14, in which the violation notice was sent out, and then 2017, and then the most recent one is 2020.
So what we're pointing out through the series of photographs is there's been over time an expansion of the area used for parking and displaying. There's 2 things that are notable. One, that the number of vehicles on the site seems to be increasing, and we don't know why, if there's been a change in use or it's now a dealership and it wasn't a dealership. The other thing is that the areas that have been expanded were supposed to be expanded concrete paving because they all occurred after 1990, and they were gravel instead. And so, just as a point of clarification, in order for something to be grandfathered, it'd have to be legal at the time it was built, and almost all the additional gravel that's been added and converted from grass areas to gravel areas has been done since 1990. And so you can't consider it grandfathered when it was added after the paving requirement was in place. So we're not able to recommend approval of this request. We think the same development standards should apply to all C5 zone property, regardless of where it's located in the community. We're concerned that granting relief in this case could set a precedent that would encourage additional variance applications and make it difficult for the board to distinguish which ones are justified and which ones aren't justified. And so the first thing that we need to do, and we haven't been able to do, is to try to calculate the number of spaces that are actually required to serve customers and employees at this location. And then we have to determine whether it is now being used as some form of dealership, and that whether those vehicles are displayed for sale, whether they're there awaiting service, or whether they're employee or customer vehicles. The solution from staff standpoint is to identify the areas that are really needed to have vehicles on them, to have them surfaced appropriately, have a reasonable timetable for bringing the property into compliance, and then having those spaces marked for customers and employees. The other thing, again, is pointed out, that's been used by auto repair places that are C5, is that they have areas where there's not cars moving in and out every day, and they have a fenced-in storage area, and because those are not carrying daily traffic, we have allowed those areas to be gravelled, but they have to be fenced off and clearly identified as a storage area. So, Dustin, do you want to narrate through the other similar businesses that we've identified and we have put in the packet?
Sure. So this would be the Petro Lube Truck Service Center that Mr. Andrew spoke of earlier in the report. It's one of the newer uses that would be considered a truck service center that would have similar characteristics to the
And
subject property.
This property is zoned C5, so it's zoned the same as the property that Kansas Truck Center is located on.
Correct. And all of the surfacing on this particular property is paved. Then you have Kenworth up at North Ohio and the interstate, and it's zoned I-2, but it's part of the North Ohio Overlay District, which means that surfacing in that particular area is required to be paved, even though normally the I-2 district does not require paving. Because of the overlay district, they are required to have paving, and all of their surfacing is paved on this particular property as well. Then we have Rush Truck Centers, which is behind the truck stop at the corner of 9th and Bosselman's 9th Street and Interstate 70, and most of their area is paved. We went through aerial photography, and this area that is gravel here used to be a storage area that was fenced in, and from what we can tell, it was removed as part of or I should say as a result of the 2007 flood, when we had Mulberry Creek overflow in the area. The fence may have been destroyed because there seems to be some correlation between that flooding event and the fence being removed. And there was a lot of vehicles and other things in this area that were underwater during that flood event, so it's very possible that fence was damaged, but it disappeared at that point in time and has been being used as a parking area, it appears, that we will also need to address from an enforcement standpoint. So they also have a gravel area that they've encroached into that historically has not been a parking area. Then we have Great Plains Trucking over on East North Street, and they are not a truck service center per se, but they are a trucking operation. So we have a number of trucking operations that we've also included just to kind of add to the picture and some context. They are zoned I-2, mostly paved in that there's some gravel on the north and west side of the building, as well as kind of along the edges of their paving area. They've expanded past the paving area that they have out there, but they are zoned I-2, which does permit for gravel surfacing as long as it's an all-weather surface. Then we have Triangle Trucking, which is I-2, but it's zoned I-2, but it's all paved, and that's out in the airport industrial area. Then you have Old Dominion Trucking, and they have a planned development district with an I-2 zoning. The planned development district element to the I-2 zoning does require that all of their surfacing be paved, and it is. Then you have FedEx, which is mostly paved. There is a little bit of gravel along some of the edges here, but for the most part, it is paved. And it's zoned I-2, which does allow for gravel again. And then we have FedEx out in the airport area, and it's zoned I-3, but everything, all of their surfacing is paved.
Yeah, just for clarification on that, the zoning of this location would potentially allow for some gravel surfacing, but the airport authority has covenants that require all these areas to be paved. So we're not trying to overload you with other facilities. What we're trying to point out is that we don't believe that Kansas Truck Center has been unfairly singled out with a requirement to have their areas paved when there are so many similar businesses that have all their driving, parking, maneuvering areas paved with asphalt or concrete. So that was the purpose of providing those. And with that, we would be glad to be open to any questions from the board before hearing from the applicants.
Are there any questions for staff? Would the applicant like to speak?
Yeah, I'd like to, if you could go back to the aerial.
If you wouldn't mind standing up to the mic here,
Okay.
and if you wouldn't mind stating your name and position.
Mike Armbrust, I'm the general manager of Truck Center Companies. If you could pull up the aerial footage, I'll kind of explain. So in 2018, I become the general manager, and right up front about where your mouse is, down just a little bit where that front row of trucks is, that was all gravel. If you go out to the side going east, that was gravel, and all the way along the back of the building. We did have that all paved. The reason for paving is that is where our work row trucks are. That's where our employees park there on the north side of the building, and as well as on the east side of the building. On the very south end along that guardrail that's there where those trucks are parked, those are our trucks that have been repaired. When they're repaired, we put them out there because we don't have enough storage to mix our repair and our work row trucks. So they stay there until the customer comes to pick up their truck. At the time they come up to pick up the truck, they come in, they pay for the repair bill, they walk out and get in their truck and drive off. That is used for storage mostly. We do have right in front of the truck row where the new pavement was put in 2018, we have a right-up lane directing. We also have a lot of signage on our property directing customers to pull up there, park their truck, and come up to the service department for ride-up. Then we in turn pull the truck up to our work row, which is concreted, and park the truck until it's pulled into the shop. The repair is complete. Once the repair is complete, it's then parked on the south guardrail. Putting up a fence would not work very well for that. The reason being is that we have multiple customers that come in every day to pick up their repaired trucks. So that would mean that we'd have to have somebody go out there and pull the truck out of the fence or open up the gate to allow them to leave with the truck. So we have made improvements over the years, but just concrete and that, we think it's a little excessive for what we use it for. We understand dust and stuff like that, but at the same time, it is, you got 18-wheelers that roll over it all the time, so it is compact very, very hard. The pothole thing, I do get gravel and put new gravel in the areas with potholes to make sure that it is smooth so we don't have a rough ride going through there. Just back here in February, I had a load of rock hauled in and scattered out to fill in those potholes. We try to make sure that the property is also very well maintained. You know, it says a lot for our business when customers pull into our lot for our lot to look good. So.
Can you explain how the different areas, west, north, east, along the concrete facing 9th Street, how those,
Okay,
why
so
there's so many more vehicles now than there have been historically, and how those are used?
that's because our business has grown. Year over year, our business continues to grow just like the trucking industry. The trucking industry grows, and with that, we have more trucks on the road. Therefore, we have more trucks that we sell and more trucks that we service and repair. So in the northwest corner there, that is our sales lot. So those trucks are on display. Those are our trucks that are actually for sale by customers. You know, new and used trucks are parked out there. As far as on the north side, just to the right of that or just to the east of that, that is all employee parking. And then here on the east end of the building, right there where those vehicles are parked, that's also employee parking for the service department, service technicians. We will be painting parking lines in all of those particular areas. We already have painted parking lines down on our work row, right down over to the right, down right in there. We have parking lines already painted there also. So we have 17 bays, and we have more than enough parking stalls in that area. If I remember right, it was 2 parking stalls for every 1 bay that we have, and we have more than 34 parking stalls in that area. As far as right up front where the grass is, that is where all of the office personnel parks there. And then we have customer parking right in that area there, about where your arrow is.
Are there any questions from the board for the applicant? Is there any questions or comments from the audience?
We do not have anyone online.
Okay. Is there anybody on the board that would like to make a motion?
I would make a motion to deny the applicant's request.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded to deny the applicant's request. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Motion carried. Thank you. Next, we will move on to application V22-5.
Application V22-5 has been filed by Gregory A. Wassenberg, who resides at 1401 Louise Lane, and his application is for a rear yard setback variance to allow a proposed addition to an existing attached garage, and the request is to allow that addition to extend 13 feet into the required rear yard setback area. And the location, as I noted, is 1401 Louise Lane. The area in question is part of the Dow addition, and that was platted in 1976 by Mr. George Etherington. And he originally wanted to develop the property north of the Nazarene Church as an auto dealership, and the zoning was not approved for that, so he came back and he replatted the property on the east side of Ohio, and staff referred to it as squeezing in Louise Lane south of Ellsworth. And we refer to using the term squeezing in because the lots that Mr. Etherington platted are only 81 feet deep, So if you kind of look at the area from a bigger view and you look at the lots on Minneapolis or the north side of Ellsworth, those are normal-sized residential lots. You look at the lots on Louise Lane, and they are squished down to 81 feet of depth. So the applicant's lot is 90 feet wide, 81 feet deep, has two 10-foot utilities on them, one at the rear and one along the west side of the lot. The home was built in 1980. It's a 3-bedroom home with 1.5 baths, and there's a 2-car attached garage on the west. So the building footprint is 28 by 60, and there are 15-foot side yards on each side of the lot. Our records show that Mr. Wassenberg purchased this property in 1999. He's made several attempts and explored several options for constructing a detached garage on the property, but due to the presence of easements, the very short backyard access challenges, he gave up on the idea of having a freestanding detached garage. In March of this year, he submitted a permit application for the construction of an addition on the back side of the existing attached garage. The zoning administrator reported to Mr. Wassenberger that we could not issue a building permit for that addition because it as proposed, the 14-foot addition would extend 13 feet into the required rear yard setback area, and the attached garage is considered to be part of the house, so it has to maintain that same setback. So we didn't give Mr. Wassenberg a lot of options because the only option he really had was to apply for a setback variance. There weren't any design modifications we could make. And so this application has been filed requesting relief from the strict application of the 25-foot rear setback requirement. And the applicant indicates that he needs to move vehicles from on-street parking to garage parking. So we received this application in April, and we set today for a public hearing date. Notice was provided to all adjacent property owners. Again, we're working on a setback requirement of 25 feet, and we noted also in our report that attached garages are subject to the same setback requirements as the principal structure on the lot. So the applicant has indicated that due to the shape and size of his lot and how it's been laid out, he's applying for a rear yard setback variance of approximately 10 feet. He is seeking to build an extension of his now existing garage. He cannot build out front, which staff would agree. The additional garage space must therefore be built in the rear yard on his lot. There's also an existing deck and shed in the rear of this lot that has to be built around. By building an extension of his now existing garage, he's able to set it off 3 feet from the deck. It's not going to encroach on any easement lines in the rear. There's really no other place to build a garage on the property. So in their analysis, we looked at uniqueness, and if you just look solely at the lots next door on Louise Lane, this is not unique because the 81 feet is shared by all those properties. But the primary distinction between the applicant's lot and most other standard residential lots is that it's 81 feet deep, it's substandard by 19 feet. As we discussed in a previous case, if you look at current or even recent platting, most new subdivisions of lots are 120 to 130 feet deep. This is true on the north side of Ellsworth or Minneapolis or Republic. Any of those areas, those lots are in the neighborhood of 130 feet deep, while the applicant has a shallow lot of only 81 feet. The applicant does not believe that his project will have any adverse effect on neighbors. We agree that although the proposed garage extends farther into the backyard than other structures on this block, it would line up with an already existing deck that's behind his house. The other thing we would point out is in your packet and also at your place there, staff has received indications in writing from neighboring property owners that they have no objections to this approval of this variance request. And so we also received an email that we put at your place from a neighboring owner who has no objections or concerns about the setback variance. As far as hardship, we would agree with the applicant that if the 25-foot setback requirement is strictly applied, the owner would not be able to construct an addition to the rear of his garage that is functional or usable. However, staff would request that the applicant provide additional information about the hardship that would result if he were limited to having a two-car garage like his neighbors. We don't see any impact on the general public or public health, safety, and welfare. The only concern would be if the garage interfered with the city's ability to access and maintain the rear yard sewer line, and it doesn't appear that it would. So this really boils down to whether the addition of a 14-foot deep garage is too much covered area for the size and depth of this lot and the surrounding neighborhood. The issue is whether, under the existing circumstances, looking at the dwelling size, the lot depth, there's justification to allow a 13-foot encroachment into the area. So the real two questions here are justification for the variance and then justification or particular need to have a garage that's larger than a two-car garage. So you could approve the rear yard setback variance to go from 25 to 12 feet as requested. You could approve a lesser variance than requested, such as a garage addition that was less than the 15 by 14 size being proposed. You could postpone action to a future meeting date if you determine that additional information from staff or the applicant is required to reach a decision today, or you could deny the setback request. We would request that the applicant provide additional information about the hardship that would result if he were limited to having a two-car garage. In other words, what is the benefit to the neighborhood himself, the need for having the additional space, and if he provides that to your satisfaction and you wish to approve the request, we've recommended two conditions of approval. One dealing with the rear yard utility easement, the other just that the garage addition conform with the plans that have been presented to you today. So with that, staff would be open to any questions you have about the general area. I think that the aerial photo that Mr. Hers put up kind of says it all. If you look at the lots squished along Louise Lane compared to the other lots in that area, they're definitely at a disadvantage with only having 81 feet of usable depth. So with that, I'd be open to any questions, or we can hear from the applicant.
Are there any questions for staff? If not, would the applicant like to speak?
If you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
I do have a question. I kind of echo Mr. Dean's questions. Could you provide us additional information about the hardships that would result if you were just limited to having a two-car garage?
Well, in the past 4 to 5 years, both of my parents have passed away, and my storage area, for as far as my basement and such is concerned, considering everything that was in the property of my parents at the time, I've tended to inherit, you might say. And some of the stuff I've been able to sell or give away. Other stuff I have not. I am running out of space on that. I did purchase a car last October, basically just as a birthday present to myself. And that's, it's a very nice car. I do not like to have it sitting outside. I would prefer to have it in a garage. Plus, I'd also like to have it right there at my house, you know, so it's more for security reasons, if anything else. A lot of it also would, well, half of that would go to storing the car. The other half would be with the extra pieces of furniture, excuse me, pieces of furniture, other belongings and stuff that belonged to my parents and stuff before they passed. And like I said, my basement is about the same size as my house. It's 1,100 square foot, but only half of that is good, well, actually about a quarter of it's good for storage. The rest of it's all finished. So it would also be used for something of that nature as well. And I just really don't want to put it out in a storage unit. That's kind of the big thing right there. I just as soon have it right close by, so that way, you know, with security reasons, if nothing else, because there are some family heirlooms and such that I don't feel comfortable.
So if this were approved, it would result in a car currently parked in the street being able to move into a garage situation?
Yes.
Does the board have any questions for the applicant? Are there any questions or comments from the public besides those that have already been received by the board?
We do not have anyone on Zoom or in the meeting area currently.
So just in terms of notification, every owner that's adjoining that we sent notice to responded back in a favorable response, so.
Is there a motion from the board?
I'll make a motion to approve the application, or the variance application.
Just a quick clarification on your motion. Do you have any, I know the staff made some recommendations like on some contingencies.
Would your motion include the two conditions we
motion
recommended?
Would include the two conditions.
Thank you for clarifying. Is there a second? I will second the motion. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor of the motion, say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Wassenberg, what that means is that your building permit that has not been able to be issued can now be issued. If you give us a little time, we'll get that set up for you, but you don't need to submit anything else. We'll just respond
Sounds good.
accordingly.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we'll move on to application V22-6, filed by Jeff Mays on behalf of Ripco.
I'm going to let Mr. Hers give you an update on the status of this application.
So the applicant contacted us this week and requested that you postpone the application to the next BZA meeting, which, let me pull that up.
I believe it's the 16th of June.
Yes, 16th of June. So they were unable to attend today, and so for that reason, they'd like to postpone their application to the 16th of June, which is our next Board of Zoning Appeals hearing.
Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion to postpone to the June 16th BZA meeting.
It's been, is there a second to the motion?
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded to move application V22-6 to the next Board of Zoning Appeals on June 16th. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Motion carried. There's no administrative items to come before the board. Is there any unfinished or other business to come before the board?
The only other business we would provide to you is that we're going to work with the city clerk's office to see if there's any expressions of interest from members of the public interested in being appointed to this board. And then you've made a motion to continue one item to June 16th, and we'll have a second agenda item on that meeting. There is a property on Upper Mill Heights Drive, and they are requesting a variance for a detached garage that is slightly taller and slightly larger than what the RS zoning there allows for, and so they have filed an application for variance from the maximum garage size and a very minor height variance, and so those will be the two items on the 16th.
Thank you. Next, we'll move on to public forum. Is there anybody from the public that would like to speak?
We do not have anyone on Zoom or in the room to speak on the public forum.
Is there a motion for adjournment?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded that we adjourn the meeting. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Motion carried.